So today we're going to talk about civil trial courts and take a look at what it is they do and how it is they work and what sort of is their purpose. Tao Dumas looks at civil trial courts in the United States. So we need to sort of differentiate between what is civil and what is criminal. Now, most trial courts in the United States handle both civil and criminal aspects, though there are specific and different types of courts depending on states that may have just one type of jurisdiction over another. So what differentiates civil from criminal? Civil, by definition, usually doesn't involve the government. It is usually an individual suing another individual, an individual suing a business, and in more rare occasions, an individual suing a government. And usually these are for purposes of liability. And so it is usually rewarded in terms of monetary damages. Um, it works like a trial. Burdens of proof are different than a criminal trial, which I would presume most of you are more familiar with. But it's the government acting as a neutral third party arbitrator in disputes. So the government is acting as theoretically an impartial decision maker. And let's talk a little bit about that impartiality. Dr. Dumas continually brings up an article from 1974 that all of us who work in the field of public law are very familiar with by an individual by the name of Mark Galanter. And Mark Galanter looked at basically why the haves come out ahead. It's the title of his piece or the subtitle of his piece. And he simply classified how individuals fare when they bring suit against businesses or other individuals or other governments. And he found something that absolutely won't shock anyone, and a finding that has been consistently demonstrated across not only just civil trial courts, but appellate courts and also criminal courts. And that is the haves come out ahead. Individuals who have less resources are less likely to win against individuals that have more resources. And we tend to think of this sort of as a gradated standard. So individuals, by definition, have less resources than a business. And businesses generally have less resources than local governments, and then state governments, and then the federal government. And this sort of stratification is a useful mechanism for us to understand why individuals lose. But there are a few things that can be done to sort of mitigate the success rates across those groups. One way is by getting an exceedingly qualified attorney. You may be an individual with very few resources, but if even pro bono, someone decides to take your case or on a contingency fee take your case, someone exceedingly qualified, that can mitigate to a fair extent the resource disadvantage that you might be facing. But this is a consistent finding, and Dr. Dumas looks at this across 2 different years and finds that it's true in her data. And I myself have looked at why the haves come out ahead in state Supreme Courts, especially involving cases of indigenous law. And these patterns hold true. The resource disadvantage is real. And what that means substantively and why that is substantively important is this is without controlling for any context of law. We're basically saying law doesn't matter. And if we assume that in any given case, there's a 50-50 shot that one person is correct or the other, we would expect a very even win-loss rates between parties. But when we classify parties on the basis of their resource advantage or disadvantage, we notice that the law is not entirely impartial. And it may not be so that the law is impartial. The law in these contexts could be absolutely applied impartially, but the resources that one brings to the table in a civil trial and in other civil cases strongly affects the outcome of that case. And when resource disadvantage is high, let's say an individual facing off against the federal government, that individual is very, very likely to lose. And so substantively, the idea about why haves come out ahead is important because it says a lot about our criminal, not our criminal justice system, it says a lot about our judicial system. And it tells us a lot about why certain groups want to access courts more often. And that's because they know that they're more likely to win.